Salailo Makhwidir. And we're going to be switching gears now to a very, very concerning conversation. The University of Cape Town has confirmed it has lost approximately, get this, 250 million in donor funding. This following its pro-Gaza resolutions adopted by the university's council. The reported losses include funding for research, student bursaries, and philanthropic projects, with the university acknowledging that some donors withdrew or withheld financial support after the resolutions were passed. UCT has also been grappling with uncertainty for research funding linked to changes in the United States of America's federal policy. This has added further pressure onto one of Africa's leading universities. The developments have reignited conversations and debate over academic freedom, institutional neutrality, donor influence, and whether universities should face financial consequences for taking positions on international matters and conflicts, like the ones that we're seeing unfold in the Middle East currently. And joining us now to answer some of those questions is Dr. Shuaib Manjra, healthcare practitioner and activist, going to give us more insight on that. Doc, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you, Salelo.
And I want to jump right into it. The headline that UCT has lost around 250 million in donor funding following its Gaza-related resolutions. Can you give us your first initial reaction to this figure and also what you're seeing on the ground within the institution in itself? Is this felt by the students, by the university in general?
So, Salelo, it's not new news. This news has been probably from last year, beginning of last year, 2024. So it's not new news. It's neither bombshell news, whatever it is. The
Mm,
media's picked it up quite late, simply because UCT appeared before the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Higher Education 5 weeks ago. And this was part of the report and the questions asked to UCT about this loss of funding. So it has been in the public domain all along, simply that it was reported to Parliament this week. In fact, this loss of donor funding was the basis for Professor Adam Mendelssohn's case against UCT, which was heard in the High Court, and where the decision is pending. So, and this was detailed in his papers. In fact, the basis of his application against UCT was that UCT didn't take into account this potential funding loss. So, yeah, it's been known for a long time. It's not new news. It's not bombshell news. It's been there, and UCT's been dealing with it.
mm,
But it's two separate issues. I mean, the issue around the donor funding and loss of donor funding is different from the United States withdrawing funding. There's two separate issues altogether. The one is related to the Gaza resolutions. The other isn't. The United States has just frozen funding to all universities around the world. Um,
mhm.
and all universities in South Africa. So it's not a uniquely UCT thing or a South African thing. It's just a global phenomenon where they've frozen funding. So there's two separate issues, and I think we need to disaggregate them.
And the issue that we want to focus on is specifically the Gaza resolutions. Can you maybe just give us an overview of some of those resolutions that were made by UCT's council? What did they dictate? What did they mean for the university? And ultimately, this loss of funding that we're currently seeing.
So there were three elements to the resolution. The one resolution was around essentially condemning Israel's genocide in Gaza, its destruction of universities and hospitals and historical sites. So that was one kind of a general motion about condemnation. The second was about proscribing um, UCT relations with those engaged in the Israel Defense Force. So you know that there's academics who affiliate themselves to the Israel Defense Force. So UCT would prescribe any relationships with academics whose academic affiliation is the IDF. So not academics, linked to other universities in Israel or whatever it is. It was very specific that those academics whose academic affiliation is the IDF. That's the second one. The third element of the resolution was the adoption of the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism and not the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. Now, there's a difference between both, because the IHRA definition, as it is commonly known, is weaponized. And we see what's happening in the United States, in the UK, in Germany, in parts of Europe, in Australia as well, is that the IHRA definition is weaponized to chill any criticism of Israel, because that's what it was meant to do, or that's what it
Mm-hmm.
is used for at the moment. The Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism is developed by academics who work in the field of anti-Semitism, and UCT had adopted that definition of anti-Semitism rather than the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So those are the three elements, or basically the critical elements of the resolutions.
I want to come back
There was a
to yes,
fourth resolution. Let me add, there was a fourth resolution
yes, please,
around,
please, please.
yeah, there was a fourth resolution around proscribing any relationship with any university in Israel, and that resolution did not succeed. It lost by a small majority. So yeah, I mean there were four resolutions, three of them were successful.
I want to come back to, very, very two important questions that you always get when something like this does arise. Number one, those that are for, the decisions that were made by the UCT Council, they make the argument that a university that has moral principles shouldn't be dictated by financial pressure. Do you believe UCT made the right decision regardless of the cost? That's number one. And then you have the other side, critics, obviously, who argue that universities exist to educate students and to advance research and not to take political positions. Where do you think the line should be drawn between the two? And do you feel UCT has made the correct decision despite the cost of it?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. I mean, the first question is, what is a university? And I think that's the fundamental question. Does university operate independent of society? Does it operate outside of society, or does it operate above society? Or does a university actually reflect the society in which it engages? And we know that during apartheid, universities were the hotbed of protest against apartheid. And we know that, for example, the Vietnam War, you look at any major event in the world, universities being, a place of political activism, a place of values, a place of justice, a place of ethics, that where students reflect, and academics reflect on what's happening in society. So, you don't have a university is not an ivory tower. A university is an embedded part of society. But more importantly is that the University of Cape Town and other universities have value statements, and they speak about that part of our objective is to create more just societies. And the universities say that, so if you say that in your value statement, then you must be held to that commitment. You can't say one thing and then say, no, the university is going to be neutral in the time of genocide. Okay. Now, there's a difference between university neutrality and university autonomy. University autonomy means that we allow universities to make their own decisions, and that's important part of academic freedom. Neutrality is not a condition of universities. Universities don't have to be neutral. UCT is taking positions on lots of different things. So, this is part of that. Now, in terms of universities taking positions, yes, they should take positions on things which have ethical, moral, and to me, this is the moral issue of our time. The genocide in Gaza is a moral issue of our time, and particularly because universities are being destroyed and targeted deliberately by Israel. And you know that UCT hosted 27 medical students who couldn't complete their degrees in Gaza because the universities were bombed, and UCT housed them, educated them, and allowed them to complete their degrees. So UCT has played a role in this. Now, the flip side of it is funding loss. Can we as universities allow ourselves to be dictated to by funders in terms of what we should do or not do? And that questions the very heart and integrity of what a university stands for. And there's two principles. One is academic freedom, and the second is institutional autonomy. The moment funders begin to dictate what you do and the decisions you make and how you should act, that's the end of universities. So universities have to act autonomously, and in this case, the university did act autonomously. Was UCT aware of this risk of funding loss? Yes, we were, because we had known that we had received threats before that donors will withdraw if we take these resolutions on Gaza. So we were aware of it when we made these decisions. And the question is, do you give in to this bullying by funders, or do you stand by your principles and saying, look, it's a cost we're willing to take? Now, the flip side of that is, who bears the cost of it? So clearly, if you look at the largest withdrawal of funding was from the Donald Gordon Foundation. And the Donald Gordon Foundation is run by his daughter, Wendy Applebaum, and her husband, Hilton Applebaum. They run it at the moment, and they were negotiating on behalf of them. Now, part of their contract with UCT was that UCT would abide by the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Now, to me, that is dictating to a university what it should do in terms of its policy. And to me, that goes against the spirit of institutional autonomy. When UCT adopted the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, that's when they called a breach of contract. And that's where they withdrew the 200 million rand. But it's also to do with support of Israel that these people have. I mean, this was a technical issue around a breach of contract. Now, the Donald Gordon Foundation was giving UCT 20 million rand per year for the period of 10 years for a virtual neuroscience institute, which was to be named after Donald Gordon. So they had naming rights in perpetuity, and this donation was over 10 years, 20 million rand a year. And it was mainly to do with research and promote, neuroscience research and, postgraduate studies, etc. So, in a sense, it didn't contribute to the general operating budget or student bursaries, for example. It had to do with the Neuroscience Institute. The other two donors who withdrew were the Harry Croxley Foundation and the Dell Foundation, and some of that money had to do with student funding, and we lost about 15 million rand in donor funding. But on aggregate, if you look at UCT's funding from the time the Gaza resolutions were taken, our donor funding has actually gone up by 16%. Our total funding income has gone up by between 5 to 6%. So in aggregate, UCT hasn't lost money. UCT has actually gained and made more money for whatever reason it is. So we've got fewer donors, but we've got more money coming in. So, it hasn't impacted UCT significantly in terms of actual students, implicated, because UCT's got a couple of billion rand in its reserves as well, which can always come to help students in need.
And I think that's the positive aspect or part of it. Just two more questions before I let you go. Number one, looking ahead, what options does UCT have right now going forward? Should it actively seek replacement funding from, other countries and organizations that are aligned with this position? Or should it focus on rebuilding relationship with donors who have withdrawn? Is that completely out of the picture as a conversation? And I think number two, just beyond the politics of it, what lessons should South African universities and institutions of higher learning take from this moment about building institutional values and academic freedom, and I think most importantly, financial sustainability, just looking at the current state of the world and there being no certainty when it comes to where your money could be coming from, depending on the politics of the day?
So on your first question, I think universities always need more money. And in South Africa, there's going to be an inexorable decline of funding for universities from government. Now, it's common cause that universities are the biggest funders of universities in South Africa. UCT's biggest donor is the government, either through direct funding or through NSFAS funding of students. So, we derive most of our income from government. So the universities always need more money to promote the academic project, and the more needy students we take in, the more money we need to support them. So whether it is those who qualify for NSFAS funding or what we call the missing middle, we'll always need more money for that. And we've got a crisis at UCT about student housing, for example, Black student throughput. There's a number of issues that we're dealing with. UCT has a debt of 1 billion rand from student fees that haven't been paid. So there's this major financial crisis, and we need money. we need to build relations with these donors who've withdrawn funding, and I think that's an important part of it. And hopefully, 2 years down the line, they recognize that UCT's position was an absolutely correct position, considering the Gazan genocide and what's happening and what's unfolded from the time the UCT took that decision. That things have only got worse, and I don't think anybody who has an ounce of ethics can begin to ignore, the severity and the consequence of what's happening in Gaza, and can understand UCT's position on it. So the one is to rebuild relations. But the second part is also to look for new funders. And I think that we need new big funders to come to the party, whether it's other governments, whether it's foreigners. And we get a lot of money from foreigners. I mean, MasterCard funds UCT to the tune of probably about R1 billion a year. But even South Africans, I mean, South African Muslim community, South African Black community needs to begin to put money into institutions as well. So both, we need to build relationships, and second is, we need to find new funders to fund UCT. On your second question, in terms of what lessons we've learned an important lesson. If and you look to the United States and look at other parts of Europe, or you look at United States and look at Europe, and you see what's happened to universities because they've bent over to funders and to government. They've basically lost their sense of integrity. They've lost their institutional autonomy. There are departments closing down. Students are being repressed. South Africa is a beacon of hope in terms of the way we've stood up to bullying. We stood up to bullying by funders. We stood up to bullying by other role players, by Zionists around the world, by liberals. We stood up to that bullying. And I think that's the lesson we've learned, that fundamental to a university is integrity. If a university doesn't have integrity, it's got nothing.
I think we're going to leave on that note, Dr. Shuaib Manjra. Jazakallah so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam. We're going to take a quick break. News and views will continue after this.